Hi, Matthew Moran, and this is Arrogant Sage Media. In this video, we're going to be covering a dashboard reporting tool I set up for a client that uses Airtable. And I'll explain all of that in just a minute. But I want to discuss Arrogant Sage Media and kind of what I do. So on this particular channel, Arrogant Sage Media, I make videos that cover technology, and sometimes that technology or the tools are related to my consulting, either in data analytics and databases or content creation and content marketing. And then I also cover videos on the tools I use as a songwriter and performer. So you'll find both those here. I even have a video, I think a couple of guitar tutorials or guitar lessons. And who knows, I'll probably cover some other things in the near future as well. Then I have another channel, it's my official artist channel, where I have my songwriting and songs that have been put into distribution. On that channel I talk about songwriting and recording and production. So I have a link to that in the description as well. I would love it if you subscribe to both channels, and I'm going to work to make the content both entertaining and informative. Now let's talk about this video here. First of all, if you're unfamiliar with Airtable, Airtable is a tool that I like and dislike immensely. So it allows you to create a relational database very quickly. It's done in the form of a series of connected spreadsheets with a little added features. And so I like that. What I dislike about it is it doesn't have a whole lot of workflow control, and data can get very messy very quick, especially if it's complex. However, I have a client, Brilliant PR and Marketing, that has a very robust business, and they do a lot of their data tracking using Airtable. That's what they currently use. So they needed a reporting dashboard, and this is kind of shows the tools I use and how I built that. And so let's jump into that. The first thing we're going to cover is getting the table out of Airtable into some other form so that we can report on it. So what I used was I pulled the data from Airtable into a Google Sheet, and then from that Google Sheet we do a data transformation. We transform the data and modify it, and we put it into another product that Google has called BigQuery, and we make a native BigQuery table because we can run SQL queries against it. We can do a lot more with the reporting, and it's much faster than querying the spreadsheet directly. And finally, we go to Google Data Studios, which is their dashboard and reporting tool, and we connect that to our BigQuery data. So let's cover all of that. The first thing I'm going to cover is how we set up a Google Sheet and the JavaScript necessary to pull the data from Airtable. That's the first step. And also, just so you know, down in the description there's a link to a blog entry where I cover all of this, and I also have the code that you can grab and you could set up today if you're using Airtable to extract data out of Airtable to do exactly what I'm doing. So look in the link, go to Pulse Informatics, you'll find it there. I have a blog entry that covers it. Alright, so let's jump into that video. So let's start by taking a look at our Airtable data. I create a field where I just show the record ID. It's a formula field with the record ID formula. So if we look at customized field type, you'll see record ID. That's my formula. And then I have an auto number field. I'm kind of a stickler for having those. And I use these so that I can just identify the record easily. Sometimes I use the record ID to copy and paste to connect records to each other when I'm moving records en masse. And then we have our regular fields: staff, sales level, cash credit, source, and sales date. That's all the data we're going to bring over. Now we're going to create what we need to have the data drop into it. So we're going to create a new Google Sheet. And let's just call this AT Data Tutorial. And the very first sheet I create, I name it AT Data Control, just because I reference that in my script. It could be any name. And what I do there is I just create a column heading of sheet name, start, and finish. And this is because in my script you could have it retrieve data from multiple sheets or from multiple Airtable bases and drop it in place. And I kind of do this time and date stamp as to when the script starts and when it ends. Now, it's running asynchronous, so the time really is not relevant because it may return this time before it finishes running, or before it actually finishes retrieving all the data. But either way, I like having it there. And so just make those bold. They can be anything. It doesn't really matter for them to be bold, but that's it. And now what we need to do is bring over our script. So I go to Tools, Script Editor, and it starts by giving you the generic my function. I'm going to open up my script here, and I'm going to highlight all of this, copy it, and paste it. Now, a couple things to note. This is going to be the script that kind of runs as many data pulls as we need, and so I have identified here sales data. And what you're going to notice is I don't have my API key, which you will need. I don't have the base ID, which you will need. So I'm going to show you how to get those, although I'm going to obscure my API and even the base ID. But I'm going to show you where you get those. I have those ready to drop into place anyways. So when we go to Airtable, when you're looking at a given base and a given table, you can just go into Help, go down to API Documentation, and I'm going to show the JavaScript here. I'm going to hide the base ID, which is sitting over here, so you can just grab that. And you see here where it has the checkbox, Show API Key. Well, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to not check that. I'm going to scroll down this JavaScript, and this is where the key is going to be found. When I click on Show ID, this is going to change to actually show me the API key, which I can then copy and paste into my script, and also you can get the base ID right here. So if I do Show API Key, there it is. I'm hiding it, but either way, you know what I mean. Now I can grab that and I can copy it into my script. All right, so we're going to do that. And there we have it. Once again, we're going to obscure that from you, but now I'm going to save this. And once I save it, it's ready to run. And it's going to run the function get Airtable data because that's the first function it found. I could drop this list down and show another function, but this is what we want to run. And what's going to happen is it's going to come in here and it's going to set all my parameters for the sales fields that I'm pulling, or for the fields I'm pulling. I call that variable sales fields, but it's also going to the sheet that I'm going to build, which is going to be sales data, the row that I'm going to place my timestamps onto, and then the table name that I'm retrieving from, which is sales data. And I don't have a view, and I'm not using a filter. And then this is just where it's going to go grab that, place that information in this sheet, the sheet that we're building, and then when the script starts, and then when it ends. And where I define that is up here. AT data control is the sheet where I'm placing that. That's that variable. All right. So we've saved it. Let's run it. What's going to happen when we run it is it's going to ask us to confirm permissions, basically. And it's running. Authorization required. I'm going to review permissions. And it's going to ask me which account. And then it's going to say Google hasn't verified this app. That's okay. We're going to choose advanced, and we're going to go to this Untitled project, which I'll change the name of later. Should have changed it, but either way, it doesn't matter. And we're going to allow that project. Now it's starting the actual execution. It's grabbing data from Airtable, and it's going to drop it into a new sheet. If I go over here and take a look at the sheet, we don't need to watch that spin up. We can see here that it's just sitting there. We only have the AT data control sheet. There is no other sheets, but it's going to create a brand new sheet for the sales data. And then it's going to drop that data into place, as well as put our timestamp variables into this data control sheet. Let that run. I think last time it took me about literally under a minute. Oh, there we go. And bam, it's dropped the data in. That's 9,000 rows. If I go back here, we see that it's placed our timestamp in here, and here's our data. If I scroll down to the bottom, there's 9,293 rows, which includes our header row. And if we go to our sales data here, we can see, let's close that. we can see 9,292 records, which matches our sheet. So we pulled all the data in that's in this sheet. Now with this data, and in the next series of videos, I'm going to show how you bring that into Google's BigQuery and ultimately into Google Data Studio for reporting. But here is all our data. Kind of want to come back to our project. Couple things. Let's name it AT Data Full Code, whatever. We'll rename that. But now that we have it set up to run, this is where it can get interesting, because we can now go over here to these triggers, click on trigger, and we can add a new trigger. It's going to run that get Airtable data and just leave this as the default. Now, what is going to be our event source? It's going to be time driven. There's other ways you can run it, but this is what I try and do. And it's going to be on an hour timer. Okay, I could modify that, but every 4 hours is probably fine. And save it. And now it's ready to run every 4 hours, and it will ultimately give me notification that it's successful or not. I can have it send me messages. There's a variety of things you could do. But either way, now it's set to pull my data several times a day, which allows me to have refresh data regularly. And 4 hours is probably enough for my client. I think I actually run theirs every 2 hours, but it's ultimately up to you based on how often the data changes. Now that we have our data in a Google Sheet, we're going to go through the process of taking that and getting it into BigQuery as a native BigQuery table, which means we aren't going to be querying the Google Sheet directly. We're actually going to query a big data sheet. So we have to, a BigQuery sheet, or a BigQuery table. So we're going to take the data and we're going to transform it to make it a little easier to report on. So let's look at how we do that. All right, so now we're in the Google Cloud Platform console, the BigQuery console. And I've created a project called Airtable Data, kind of gives it this number here. And what I'm going to do now, you can get to this point. I'm trusting that you'll find your way through to get the BigQuery API enabled and the things you need as far as that's concerned. But ultimately get to this point where you have a project. And the first thing we have to do is we have to create a data set. And the data set is kind of a container for all the data that we're going to be using. And so the first thing we do is we just create a data set. So we're going to call this data set AT We'll call this data set AT Data Tutorial, whatever. And data location, gives some United States is really where it's going to default to anyways, but that's fine. Google Managed Key is fine. We're not doing any other security mechanisms. That's for, oh yeah, this can only contain letters, numbers, and underscores. So we'll do an underscore here. AT Data Tutorial. Create our data set. So now we have a data set, and this is just, once again, a container for holding data. And the next thing we have to do is we have to ultimately create a table. Okay, so I open the data set, and shows us some information about our data set. And then we have this Create Table button. And what we're going to need is we're going to need some information from our Google Sheet that we pulled data in the last video. So the first thing we do is we need a link to this sheet. So I right mouse click and get link. Brings this information up. I copy the link into memory. The other thing we're going to need is the name of the data that we're pulling out, sales_data. So just remember that. So what we're going to do is, what's the source of this table? It's Google Drive. This is where we put the link to the Google Sheet that we're using. The file format is Google Sheet, which changes some parameters down here. And then it says the sheet range, and this is where we take the sheet of data, that name, right? So I can just copy that, but or I could have typed it either way. Paste that in there. Now I'll just keep this. These defaults are going to be fine. It's Airtable data, AT data tutorial, which is where we're going to keep the data, and external table, which means it's going to be looking. It's not creating data in BigQuery, not yet. It's looking at a Google Sheet, and we can still run queries against it. SQL queries, everything works great there. Now, what are we going to name the table? This is the name that we will be referencing in BigQuery. So we can call this AT sales data. And we're going to auto-detect the schema. It's going to just use the data that's coming over. Drop down these advanced options. We want to skip the header row because we don't need the headers to be part of the data. That's going to define the field names for us. Nothing else is really needed. And I'm going to create the table. Now here's our data table referenced, and we can see here, if we look at the details, that it's looking at a Google Sheet. It gives us that information. It takes 0 size in BigQuery because all the data is stored in Google Sheets. We're just running queries against this. All right, and it gives you the option to run a query against it. And so we'll just do a quick test. We can say bring everything. It's just standard SQL. And limit it to 1,000 records. That's fine. So let's run this query just to see what happens. And here's our results. Now we can do standard where statements, things like that. So we could where, and then it'll ask us field names. So we could say sales level equals platinum, for instance. And then we can run that query. And now we're seeing our results just show us that. So we're querying the Google Sheet. But, and we can use this in Google Data Studio. But as I mentioned in the blog entry, the time difference between running queries against the entire data set when we were changing parameters in Google Data Studio, if we were actually querying the Excel sheet versus a native BigQuery table, is magnitudes faster. We're talking anywhere from 7-8 seconds to 12 seconds for a refresh of data versus 1 second. So we want to create another table based on this data. And we want that to constantly be refreshed because this data, the Excel sheet, is going to be refreshed as well. So here's what we do. I already have a query kind of set up. Let me go find that. Here it is. So, and I've got to make sure I correct the table names. I'm pretty sure I made changes. So, yeah, I got to change this. That was an old one. Anyways. So what we have here is a select statement. I grab everything, but then I do a series of case statements because I wanted to make sure we didn't have to do a pivot table. I wanted to more tightly control the data that was coming over. And so I was looking at sales level, and if tier 1, if it equals tier 1, it's going to give a count of 1. If it's not that, it's going to be 0 to a field called tier 1 count. And I do that for all the data types we find there. And then I say, if it doesn't equal that, and I actually have to fix this, but that's another story. I have to test for a null value as well. But if it doesn't equal that, it's going to throw it under this other count. And that's fine for now. Then I have the same thing with cash or credit. Suffice to say, this is going to work for us. And so what I'm going to do is grab all of this minus the from, because the from data is slightly different, and put it here. Now, Oh, let's redo this. Put it here and get rid of our where statement. Now we have a query that's going to return all these additional columns, which is really how I want the data to be for reporting. And so we can test it once again by running it. Then I'll show you what we're going to do with it. And here we see our data. So it's giving us a count where appropriate for the data that we've retrieved. And we can see that we're starting to get counts in some of the other columns. But right here, that field is still null. Oh, I can go to, I guess I can't do a larger page size. Let's go down a little bit. There we go. So we see here it's equal to gold, which means the column that is gold right here is going to be set to 1. And that's going to allow us to summarize the data very quickly and easily when we go over to Google Data Studio. So what we're going to do is take a little break because I'm going to actually fix that query so that I grab the null values as well. All right, I fixed this query on this one case statement. So if sales level doesn't equal tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, platinum, gold, or silver, or if sales level is null, then it's going to add a count to this other count column. So when I run that statement, which I already did, we can see down here, sales level is null, other count has a value in it. And we really should do that for all the fields, but I'm not going to take the time right now. So now here's what we need to do. We can go in and we can schedule this. And there's a couple things we want to have happen. The first is we can go into query settings and it says save query results in a temporary table. But that's not what we're going to do. We're going to set a destination table. Once again, in our project dataset name, what's the table name we're going to do? We're going to do, and this is what I do with tables that actually exist in BigQuery. I call it TBL sales data. And we're going to overwrite this table every time we run this. Everything else pretty much can stay the same. So I save those parameters. And then we go here to schedule and create a new scheduled query. What's the name for our new scheduled query? Make sales table. That will work. When do I want it to run? Well, first of all, I'm going to start it immediately. We can run it hourly or custom. And here's what's cool about custom. Every 2 hours, for instance. Now it'll tell you the schedule will run every 2 hours. And it's going to start now and it's never going to stop. Here's our project information. I don't need a partitioning field. Tell it to overwrite the table. Everything else can be default. I don't need to send email notifications. So let's schedule this. And it wants me to approve that with my account, which is fine. And now we can see that it's added the new table, TBL sales data. And if we look at this one and look at the details, what you'll note about it is that it does have a table size. And it has a number of rows. Now, it's not very large, so it's unlikely I'm going to be charged, which is great. That was part of our reason for doing this. We're going to be well under the threshold of free services for Google's cloud platform. But you can look into the details of that. It's based on your data. But now we have this data table here that we can actually run queries against and ultimately connect to with Google Data Studio, which is what we're going to do in the next video. So let's just run a quick query on it. And we do the same thing, show us all of it. And I'm not going to tell it to limit it to 1,000. I want to run it against everything. Pull this over here. And you can see it runs substantially faster than what we would get if we were querying the Google Sheet. And once again, our other count is going up because we are testing for a null value, which I would have to do for these as well. I didn't modify the query that way, but that's fine. Basically, I want to get the data as needed for that sales type because that's where we're going to focus on a report. So let's go take a look at Google Data Studio. Now that we have all our data in BigQuery, we're going to go to Google Data Studio and we're going to connect that to our BigQuery table so we can do our reporting. And you're going to see it's pretty simple, easy to set up, very fast. And also, because we have the data natively in BigQuery, reporting and doing additional queries on that is very rapid. This worked very well for my client. So let's go check that out. All right, so now we're in Google Data Studio. First thing we're going to do is establish a data source. And so we click up here on Create, Data Source, and we're going to look for BigQuery. Now, when you first do this, it's going to require that you authorize that and perhaps enable the API. I can't remember the steps it takes. But I can look at my project. I have this Airtable data project. Here's our data set, data tutorial. And if we remember, it shows us both tables. So we have the original Google Sheets data, which we can pull from directly. Or we have this table that is going to be refreshed every 2 hours with data that gets updated here right now we have it at 4 hours if you remember my first video, which is not how I would set it up, but let's just suffice to say this data is getting refreshed in the Google Sheet several times a day. And this is going to pull that data several times a day to ensure that we have up-to-date data as much as possible. So I'm going to connect to that data source. Click Connect. It's going to show us some things about the field, and I'm going to actually create a couple calculated fields. So it shows us all this data, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm separating the Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 as one type of sale, and ultimately Platinum, Platinum, Gold, and Silver as another type of sale. So I'm going to create two calculated fields. So I can go up here and click Add Field, and we're going to call the field Tier Total. And I'm going to make this equal to Tier 1 count plus Tier 2 count plus Tier 3 count. That's it. That's all it's called. We're going to save that. So I have that field called Tier Total. And go back to all fields. So Tier Total is now there. It shows you that it's a calculated field. We're going to create another field. And this one's going to be Metal Total. I don't know if that's the right name I should use, but it'll work. Platinum count plus gold count plus silver count. Now the other count is completely separate, and that would be a grand total, and that would actually work effectively. So we're going to create a third calculated field after we save this one. Go back, and this makes things so much easier later when we go create our report. So we're going to do Add Field, and we're going to create something called row total or grand total, whatever we want to call it. And this is going to be, and I don't know if I can use those other calculated fields, we'll see. Yeah, metal total plus tier total plus other account. That should give us a total of every single record, and the total record on a given row. All right, so when we summarize these, you'll see kind of what it does. All right, so now we have that all set up. These are all our fields, and now we're going to go into reports. I could create a report right from here, but let's just go this way. So now we're going to go out to reports, create a blank report. First thing it's going to ask us to do is connect to data. And once again, it shows us all of our options with the various connectors that we have, but we're going to connect to our established data sources. This is the one we want. And I'm going to click Add. It's going to give me this message, which I don't need to see, but whatever. We add that to the report. Now, automatically, it's going in and it's just shows us the sales record ID and the record count. And that's fine. We're going to drag this out here. So it shows us that we're grabbing that data that's in our report, and it has a date range parameter that we can use. We'll use that in just a minute. First thing I want to do is go under Style. I don't want row numbers. There's some other things we can do. That's where you could style your report and conditional formatting. Not doing any of that. So there's a dimension, which is going to be kind of where we roll up data to, and it's not the record ID. I don't care about the record ID. What I want to do is the staff person. Okay, so where is staff? There's staff. I just drag it over that. Now we see our staff people here, and I can extend this out. But now it's showing us just the record count, which theoretically is fine, but record count's not the metrics we're using. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab the fields that we want to see. Tier 1. Tier 2. And I'm just going to line these up. Tier 3. Tier total. Then I'm going to go to platinum count. Gold count. And silver count. And then metal total. And then finally, we can do our other count and row total. All right. Now it's just a matter of kind of formatting things, but we're already seeing that the report is taking shape. So I want to pull Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, and Tier total. And then I'm going to take this and drag it over to the right. And drag this out a little further. Okay, so we could spend more time adjusting that. I'm not overly worried about it, but one thing I want you to see is I don't really like these headings, which is just the field name. We can click to the left of every field and just call it Tier 1 or whatever we want, and it will change our heading. Still referencing the same field, but we can control Tier 2, Tier 3, Tier total, platinum, gold, silver, and metal total. I don't like that name either. And I'm not even showing the whole thing up there. We'll probably change something. And then other and grand total. Okay, so we can go here to style also and change our heading size so we can fit more information up there. That's fine. And we could do other things to stylize it. One of the things you want to be able to do, though, if you look at your data, it already identified sales date as a date range. So now we can go up here and we can add a control. And we can add a date range control. And I'll just drop it above the report. Now what I can do, and this is what I do for my client, is I can go into this date range. And it says auto date range. Well, what I want to do is I want to show the month to date, including today's date. Now by default, when they view this report, it's going to show them the current month to date. So let's just view the report. Let's name it AT Data Report. I'm going to view it. Now I haven't, of course, put headings and other things and labels and done colors. There's all kinds of stuff you could do. But here we see our data. So now I can go in here and I can choose a different parameter. And it's got some drop downs last month. So we click on last month and I choose apply. We can see how quickly it refreshes the data. One thing I will tell you, and you could do a test, you could set up the same query that you had before, but not have it create a table and reference the, have it create a temporary table is what it does. As needed, it will reference the Google Sheet. When you do that, changing this data is significantly slower. And if you have larger data than my client, which is, pretty common, I think they have one table that has about 20,000 records, it can take several seconds as opposed to literally just seconds. So if I did all their data, so let's just say we did, and we'll do a date period. I'm going to go back to December, which I know their data starts after that, of 2019 to date. Very quick refresh. And so we have all our reporting. And we can, of course, drag this down so that it shows more rows. We can also add a parameter so we can filter on staff. Let me show you how to do that. So once again, I'm not doing much with the way of formatting, but we're going to do a drop-down list control. And it automatically determined that we want to use our control field, the one parameter. So great, that's perfect. So what it lets me do now is when I view this report, there's no filtering applied. I can drop down the list. I can uncheck everyone. I could say I want to see Kevin and Lisa and Kyle. I can also change the order of this, but that's fine. And that's what we see. The report just builds as we go. Danny and Julie and Lena. Or I can choose any one of these and choose only, and it just chooses Eric. So this is a great way to give your clients just more control over the data that they can view. Now, once they have this, they can then do other things like export the data based on the current parameters. And that will export it to a CSV file, Excel file, whatever the case may be. So this is how we use data coming from Airtable through Google Sheets into Data Studio, into BigQuery, and ultimately into Data Studio. Hopefully you find that helpful. Let me know, and if you have any questions, feel free to contact me. Thanks. So this should have gotten you started in being able to grab data from Airtable and ultimately report on it in Google Data Studio. If you're using Airtable, leave a comment, or if you have questions about Airtable, leave a comment or question as well, or anything I covered in this video. Also, if you found it helpful, I would love it, once again, if you subscribed, liked the video, shared it on your own social, or shared it with other people you might find helpful. Thanks you so much for tuning in. See you.